Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Future Ready Librarian webinar. I'm so excited for this one. This is our March webinar, and we're going to talk today about being prepared for selection policy concerns. And this is a conversation that is happening all over the country within schools and even in public spaces, public libraries. And we have been focusing on this in our summits in February and March. And so this conversation is very timely for all of us. And I know with our two guests today that you're going to get so much great information and feel really empowered and inspired afterwards too. I'm your host, Shannon McClintock Miller. I am the District Teacher, Librarian, and Innovation Director at Van Meter Community School in Van Meter, Iowa. I also serve as the Future Ready Librarian spokesperson. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Shannon M. Miller, and I blog at the Library Voice. And I put my email in here. I'm always happy to help you too. But our guests today are two dear friends of mine, and I couldn't wait to have them on the show and have this conversation. I was at school all day and couldn't wait to get home just to kick it off with Becky and Caroline.
So I am Becky Calzada, and I am the library coordinator in Leander ISD, which is northwest of Austin, Texas. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I have been in education for 35 years, and 21 of those years were in librarianship. I've also been a coordinator for the district for 11 of those years too. So advocacy is a major part and focus for me, and so it just seemed natural to be able to connect this with intellectual freedom and the rights of readers. And so I'm really happy to be here with everybody today. And you can see my Twitter information there and other things that I've been involved in. And you can follow me on BE Calzada there.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Foote. I am happy to join Shannon and Becky today to talk about being prepared. I'm a former district librarian in the Austin area, where I was district librarian for 14 years and high school librarian for 29 years and taught English before that. I'm also received the ASL Library Collaboration Award in 2019 for a project with our art history teacher, which was pretty fascinating. And I was recognized by the White House in 2013. But I'm here because I'm passionate about students' rights to access materials and making sure we're prepared professionally as librarians to have well-developed collections and to know how to respond to any difficulties. And my Twitter account is Techno Library if you would like to follow me there.
Yeah, well, welcome to the show. As I said, am just really grateful that you're joining us today. And for those of you who are listening, if you have questions or even things that you would like to share, you can always share on Instagram or on Twitter using our hashtag FutureReadyLibs and FutureReady. And so we'll be looking for those conversations and just questions and feedback also. And so you can stay connected, not only during the webinar, but all the time using those too. So I'm going to give it over to the ladies as we talk about being prepared for selection policy concerns.
So we want to talk first about the current reality, and I'm sure most of you are aware of the current reality in your state or your local area. But if you take a look at newsletters like the Office of Intellectual Freedom newsletter, which is on our next slide. This was last week's newsletter, and you can see examples of all the states that are experiencing challenges both in school and public library settings, primarily schools, but a few public libraries as well. And so schools are facing an onslaught of book challenges, both formal and informal, that seem historically unprecedented. So we want people to feel prepared.
So if you are on social media, you may be familiar with some of these hashtags. There are so many that are floating around, and these certainly aren't all of them. One of the things that we found is that these hashtags provide a glimpse of what's happening across cities and the country. Some of these may look familiar. You may have seen them on the news. You may have seen them, of course, on social media, or maybe they've appeared in your community on the various platforms. And so looking up these hashtags will help to provide insight on the climate and what's happening. So what's good about that is that you get a perspective and a understanding of what's happening. So why does this matter? And why should we care about this? Well, one of the things that we know is in the current climate is that there's a great deal of emotion involved on both sides. We've noticed that there's a rush to judgment about the things that are happening, whether it's in our the books that are in our collection or about the way things are vetted. Typically, what has been the way is to pause and ask questions, and having parents come in to seek to understand what the processes are. And what we are seeing now are accusations sometimes. Sometimes there's assumptions about particular agendas, or you may have heard terms like indoctrination that's happening in school districts or by teachers or by librarians. And so, it's important for us to stay and kind of have that pulse of what's going on. And while some of these issues seem like really sudden and out of the blue, at least not so much anymore, there's actually a lot of historical context when you think about book challenges. And so Carolyn's going to share a little bit about that.
So I don't know if this is comforting or not. I personally find it comforting to put this in the context of history and understand that as a culture and as a country, we've experienced different waves of book challenges and forces outside the school intervening in schools. And this is actually from when I first started teaching, a term called secular humanism, again, which was more of an academic study, got co-opted, like recently we've seen with critical race theory, and started being used to encompass this idea that students were being indoctrinated. And so this is a story from the New York Times in 1981, and you can see that there was a widespread effort across the country to address this topic in public schools. One of the challenges of this is, of course, it causes people to self-censor. And this quote really sums that up very well. "I think about what I'm doing twice," said Betty Duke, who teaches ninth grade history at Vines High School in Plano, a suburb of Dallas, Texas, where no specific book has been eliminated. "Is there anything controversial in this lesson plan? If there is, I won't use it." This quote's actually from that 1981 article. So the chilling effect of censorship or even widespread book challenges really creates this atmosphere where librarians and teachers are implementing highly cautious mode and sometimes censoring their own work or teaching. And this does have an impact on our students. Because after all, libraries are supposed to be democratic institutions. They haven't always lived up to that, but more recently they have, and that attempt to serve people of all ages, abilities, and really provide information that we all need to live, learn, govern, be active citizens in a democracy. And so when we self-censor or when we are censored from the outside, then we're failing to meet this really goal to serve all people. So how does this environment impact our roles as librarians? There's three kind of critical areas where it has an impact. The most obvious one is off collection development, of course. As we think about how are we building our collections or what's already in a collection, if we've stepped in as a new librarian, where are we making our purchases from? What kinds of reviews are we reading? all of those procedures and policies around collection development are sometimes impacted or come under closer examination in an environment like today's. Programming that we leave, we've certainly seen that in public libraries in the last several years, but programming even within school libraries, author visits, for example, author visit by Jerry Kraft in Katy ISD was canceled this fall. So the programming that we're putting on can be impacted. And so we need to think carefully, not about not scheduling it, but we need to think carefully about our messaging as we're planning it and make sure everyone's well informed ahead of time. And then of course, displays and events that you're hosting. I know probably some of you were very carefully considering what to do during Banned Books Month week in September, and whether or not you should have a display, what should the wording be? And it's not that you shouldn't have those displays or have events be featuring LGBTQ students, for example, but that you need to make sure that your mission and goals align with your districts and that you're clear, you have clear rationale for what you're doing. So you're prepared if people come in with questions.
So then comes the question about proactiveness versus reactiveness. And what we know is that because we are all curating collections for our patrons, you know, it can feel like a very personal thing because we know that we're taking the time, the careful time to select materials. But part of that, with that comes defensiveness sometimes, which can make it a very emotional action that happens when somebody questions you about what's going on in your collection. One of the things though that we know is that if you're proactive about your actions, to be ready is the most helpful. And so I always tell people, you know, do we want to hope that everyone is ready or do we want to know that everyone is ready? So in that proactiveness, you get to prepare, plan, practice. And so we're going to go through some of these things that you can do. So to prepare yourself, you definitely want to educate yourself on your district policies. And I also want to insert a little bit about the difference between policy and guidelines. And so in our state of Texas, you know, our school boards vote on policies that they have to follow, that our school district has to follow. And so those are pretty firm, they're voted on, and those are expectations. What I also know though is that sometimes within that policy, I need to provide clarification. So I probably have guidelines for our librarians. So, and we do. So find out what those policies are. I encourage people to print them or bookmark them so you can become familiar, because that advanced preparation is going to help you. And if there are parts that you don't understand, ask questions so that you become knowledgeable, so that if there are questions, you're ready and can answer them. Educate yourself on new laws. We know there are a lot of new laws that are being enacted. We even encourage people to be prepared and listen in when legislation is coming through, so that you can advocate on behalf of students. If there's an understanding or possibility that they're not pro students or they're in favor of censoring. Also be aware of current incidences that are happening across the area, in your community, in your state. That's important because what we're seeing right now is sort of a whack-a-mole sort of situation. You know, one book will come into question in one area, and then we'll see that same book come up somewhere else. I was recently watching a webinar, and some representatives from OIF were on, and they were mentioning, you know, if you haven't been involved in a challenge, it's only a matter of time. So, you know, being familiar with certain books that have already been questioned can really help you to be prepared. And so subscribing to newsletters and weekly blogs like from the Office of Intellectual Freedom can really help, because they give you a weekly recap of the different incidences that are happening across the country. And you never know. I know I was looking at one recent blog post, and it helped me to provide some context for what was happening over here so that we could prepare. So remember to sign up if you can, and have those, and we will have these resources at the end to share too. So I always encourage people to have those materials on hand. And so I'm a paper person. Some people don't need to have the paper version, but I always have it printed so that I can refer to it if there's a question. I also think it's important in our roles that we help to connect others to where that policy is. So you not only should you be able to find it, can you direct others on how to find it? Maybe a parent has a question, can you show them where it is? I also think, it's important to have those talking points ready to make those deliberate connections. I know for us, when we talk about our collection development policy, we also mentioned how it's connected, how the purchases we make are connected to our district mission and goals. And our library mission and goals. We also recently adopted some core values from our district. And what was great about these additions is that they include statements around equity, diversity, and inclusion. So looking for those natural intersections will help to support the work that you're doing. As you're working on programming, how does the programming connect again to your district mission and your library mission and goals? There could be some community goals. Maybe your community is actively doing some work in the area of inclusiveness and diversity. How can you make those connections to a lot more deliberate and apparent so that people will know, that the work is connected?
So another thing that has been in the news recently, there was a recent School Library Journal article about a librarian, Martha Hickson, who had very publicly shared her difficult experience with a book challenge. And one of the things she writes about in the article is selection policies. And it's important to know your selection policy and look at it, because in some states like ours, the Texas Association of School Boards kind of outlines good policies for districts, and most districts adopt very similar policies and keep them fairly up to date with TASB. But in other states, it may be very localized. So first of all, just like we said, making sure you know where your policy is and what it says. But then there's some changes you may want to examine the policy for and encourage your district to improve it. For example, considering how many times can an item be challenged? Can it be challenged at each school in the district? Can it be challenged 2 or 3 years in a row? Or do you want to set kind of a limit on the decisions that if a committee has a hearing on a book, then that hearing is good for 2 years or something like that? How detailed is your reconsideration form when a parent files that form for a book challenge? Does it ask them to read the book? Does it ask them to respond to detailed questions and concerns so that they're having to really show that they read the book and being specific rather than kind of cutting and pasting text into it? And then thinking about how transparent is your process? Does your policy have timelines that are publicly written in the policy? And just considering what that looks like as well. Those are some changes to consider if you already have a policy.
And I would add too that school districts typically go through policy revisions. I know I was recently asked that question, and so finding out what the timeline is, because usually they make policy revisions all at once if they're small, and so that also is a good question to find out so that you can submit your feedback in time to make those revisions.
I also want to add, I know my own experience was that sometimes they were being revised, and even though I was the district librarian, I wasn't aware because it was a whole batch of policy changes that came down from the state, new legislation, et cetera. So making sure that if you have either an internal legal department or you keep your curriculum team reminded that if there are changes to the material selection policy, you need to know that especially if you're a lead librarian or a supervisor. So we have some resources for you that will be available with the webinar notes. ALA has a selection policy toolkit, and we have some links to some examples, as well as to selection criteria for materials on controversial topics. Most libraries policies do ask them to have materials on both sides of controversial topics and for a variety of age and maturity levels and interests. So these are examples that you can look at. And then the ALA Library Bill of Rights outlines what ALA believes a student has the rights to access in libraries.
One of the things I can share about these toolkits, I've looked at them, and for me, one of the things that I always work to doing anything that I do is trying to have a continuous improvement mindset. And so every time we've had a challenge, you know, what are those minor tweaks? And one of the things I learned as I was trying to prepare for a challenge, the toolkit made recommendations about material to share with parents in advance, like your school mission and vision, like the ALA Bill of Rights. And so these are really great ways to improve your process and to build understanding around intellectual freedom too. So one of the things that we also want to talk about is conscious communication. We know that words matter, you know, so as you communicate with others, we want to make sure, you know, to remember certain things. And so one of the things we often encourage, that I share with our librarians, is to listen carefully. Sometimes, you know, many times people will come with questions. Sometimes they come emotionally charged. And so just listening and being that ear, because, you know, when somebody's in that state, they just really want to be heard, and asking questions to seek clarification is also great. I always encourage anyone to be mindful of not using triggering terms. You know, we know that there are certain words that are being used and leveraged, things like CRT. You know, they're mentioning that these books are this, or these books are that. And so I have gotten into the practice of saying, well, our goal in having this book is, instead of focusing on we don't have books about CRT, because, you know, they've already kind of made their mind up. And so instead, I'm going to take the time to talk about what our goals are, because I think that's important. Give neutral responses. And by that, we mean, you know, if you're not happy with this book, we recognize your right as a parent to choose for your child. And if you would like to put specific restrictions for your child, let's talk about that. Let's get that set up. But also reminding parents that, you know, we are serving so many students, and if they have concerns about this book for others, there's a process in place, and they would have to fill out the paperwork and read the book. You know, we also just want to be professional at all times, and it's just in that professional space, you know, that obviously that doesn't give anybody the right to yell, although some people get a little upset, you know, but asking people to just, you know, take a breath. I understand you're upset. You know, if we need to, you know, set some boundaries about respectfulness, or say things like, let's take a break. Maybe we circle back in about 10 minutes and everybody maybe goes to the bathroom, gets some water. Because again, some of these are emotionally charged conversations. I always encourage people to think about the email that they get. I know we've been getting a lot of different emails from different, not just like parents, but even like news media. I've gotten a couple of random emails about questions about what we're doing, and I'm really careful about, you know, email, whether it's external or internal, just because I want to make sure that we have certain things that we're saying and sharing, because what we're seeing is they're taking snapshots of what's being written and then taking it out of context. It's also important to be aware of your social media. We know that there's a lot of trolls and people out there, you know, pushing back, even when you're just sharing what good books are about. And so if you do find yourself, you know, being targeted on social media, I always encourage people to change the settings so that you only people that follow you or you follow can respond back. I mean, we had a case where a librarian was just sharing some images about kids checking out books, kindergartners checking out books, nothing, you know, problematic about that, but somebody responded about, you know, the intentions of all librarians. And so the initial reaction was, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to tweet anymore. And so we had to have a conversation with her and her principal to say, you don't have to stop tweeting. What we can do is change your settings. And and then also block people, because sometimes you just got to do that too. And that seemed to work, and we're still sharing the story of the great things that are happening in our libraries. Of
I
course,
want to
go ahead.
add that I always think if you can do something over the phone, that's preferable to an email or just walking over to talk to someone rather than sending that email is always a good idea if you can do that. And you can put
Definitely agree.
and you can put a disclaimer in your social media if you feel like you need to, that the opinions are expressed here, you know, my own or not my place of employment, that sort of thing.
Right, right. I always tell people too, to if you aren't sure about what the tone of your email could come across as, share what you're going to say with somebody else to kind of look at that. I always find though too, if my email's getting too long, it's probably not an email. I need to make a phone call or go walk over. So that is the best thing. Maybe it's a Zoom meeting really quick. So also thinking about how do you leverage your network. So we recognize, I mean, that we're not going to have all the answers. I know I don't have all the answers, but what I do know is I am connected with so many great librarians. And so it's not uncommon for me to reach out and talk something through and get some advice from Carolyn or another, you know, library friend, professional mentor, that sort of thing too. So think about reaching out to your network, you know, how, you know, share the challenge or problem you're having. What would they advise? You know, I think that's such a great thing, because what we know about this work is that it's exhausting, it's a lot, it's overwhelming, and you just kind of get tired. And so that talking to someone and leveraging that network to get advice about what to say and how they maybe handled a particular situation, because that's the other thing, you're going to run into get questions or have situations that you haven't had before. How do I navigate that? Reach out to your network, because you know they one of them probably has. And then the other last thing I was going to share is, as if you're a library leader, a library coordinator, director, and supervise librarians, over communicate about your open door policy. I tell our librarians, all my librarians have my cell phone. They know if they have a question from media or about a book, you know, they're not sure, they know that they don't have to answer right away, that they can reach out and say, Becky, I got this email. Can you look over my notes? This is what I was going to say. And we work together, we partner together. We also talk about, you know, that plan. What is their plan? You know, what is your plan if you were the librarian receiving a question? Have you talked to your principal about your plan, about what your next steps are going to be? Does your principal know what that plan is? Because if you're not talking about it, that's where the lack of preparation could maybe cause some missteps. And so just think about ways to proactively plan. And we'll be talking a little bit about additional ways through scenarios that you can practice too.
So a lot of you are probably familiar with Jennifer Lagarde and Darren Hudgens' book, Developing Digital Detectives. But one of the things they talk about in the book is helping students learn to recognize when things are triggering reactions and then how to navigate those triggers. And this is something we need to learn ourselves too, because sometimes the language that is being used is very triggering emotionally, both for district staff and for individual librarians, because it's sensationalized and it's meant to get a response. And so we have to work very carefully to detach ourselves from those triggering words and to really stay in our professional training and ethics in order to respond to statements that might be considered triggering. So just being aware of that and knowing when you are feeling triggered so that you can step back, take a deep breath, recenter yourself. And it is always okay if you're in a conversation with a parent on the phone or with a district administrator or anything in between to say, I need a minute to think about this. Can we circle back around tomorrow at such X time so that, you know, I can have all my documents together or whatever, so to give yourself the time to kind of absorb and reset. So we're sharing their Twitter handles here at the bottom because they frequently share materials online that could be helpful to you or to students in learning to recognize triggers. So another thing that's important to think about so that you're prepared for any sort of book challenge is thinking about which stakeholders need to know. Obviously, there's information that you need to have, but who else needs to be well informed? For example, if you have library staff or teachers that frequently use the library, you probably want to make sure that they know how to respond or that they know to refer the question to you, and that they're familiar that there's a policy that kicks into place when a book is being challenged, or what to do in an informal challenge with a parent. Certainly building administrators need to know, and this is something you really can't assume they know the policy well. I used to send mine out in my district every year during Banned Books Week. It was just a regular thing. Hello, it's Banned Books Week. Just want to remind you, we have a policy. I would attach the link to our district policy, reminding principals to ask me if they had any questions. But that way it was in their inbox and once a year, and it was just a reminder that it exists. Campus curriculum leaders, grade level team leaders or subject area leaders, it's important for them to know because they may be getting challenges in the classroom, and sometimes those end up spilling over into the library as well. But sometimes they use you as a support because you know the policy better than anyone. The district curriculum team, again, while you might think that they're well informed, librarians tend to be more practiced at experiencing this. And so keeping them in the loop, making sure they know the policy really well, they know where it lives, they know what to do. If a parent complains to them at the grocery store, is a good practice. And the same goes for school board members, making sure that they're aware. Even though they vote on these policies, a lot of times they're voting on groups of policies that all get approved at once. And so they're not necessarily investigating each one. And they may not be very well informed about your library policy at all, or about how libraries work, how materials are selected, what young adult literature is like in the current publishing market. So the more information all these stakeholders have, the better. And then even thinking about your parents or volunteers who are frequently in the library, because they can be your big advocates, but they have to know kind of what to say. And then another thing you can really do to be prepared, I've begun to think about this more and more, how although this is a national climate of book challenges, really all book challenge efforts and fights are local. And so how can you be prepared locally ahead of time? I think a great strategy would be to create a library advisory committee in your district, where it's a group of business owners, public librarians, museum people, students who annually meet and you get updates about the libraries and what they're working on, and just sort of act as liaisons, because that way in case of a challenge, they're already informed about what you do, and it can be a great resource for you anyway. A Friends of the Library group could be a similar type of group that maybe you don't have one currently, but it's something that you can put together from parents or volunteers or PTA members in order to have a group that's, again, easy to call upon if you need support in case of a book challenge or angry parents at school board meetings. I should say concerned parents. Sometimes they're not angry, they're just concerned and they have legitimate questions. So it varies. Student banned books clubs or freedom clubs. I know there's a high school in Becky's district, and the students came up with the idea of having a banned books club, and they're reading things that are being challenged in different schools. And I think that that's a way to also tap into a group that's going to be well informed if a book challenge has come to your school. Bilson or GSA clubs, Gay Straight Alliance, if you have one in your school, these students may be allies because the current wave of book concerns, a lot of them seem to center around LGBTQ topics. And of course, these students would be very well informed to speak about them. So think about who are your allies, both at your school and in your broader community, Who are the people that share values about literacy, education, and are willing to be part of those conversations with you? And think about how to lay that into place as soon as you could. Even though we're into the spring semester, it's never too late in the year to start initiating some of these groups.
So we've got some practice scenarios that we want to take you through today. So we're going to review some of these. We have two, and then we will go through the answers. We will probably pause a little bit just so it gives you some time to chat or ask you to pause. But we hope that we find that these are very useful.
So this is the first scenario, and I'll read it, and then we'll pause for a minute or two and give you a minute to think about it, and then we'll discuss how we might handle it. So scenario one, a banned books display in the library has been challenged by a parent, and the principal has asked for it to be taken down. How do you plan to address this? Okay, so here's some talking points that we would consider. First of all, if you have a district librarian, definitely contact them and let them know that your principal has asked you to do this, because obviously they will be your advocate with the principal. Secondly, I would suggest writing up a written rationale, like a written rationale as to why you posted this banned books display. What were some of your reasons? You can connect it to the district's mission and goals. It's always a good idea to connect what you do in the library to those in writing. You could talk about that ALA has materials on the history of banned books. Books aren't banned for just partisan reasons. They're banned for all sorts of reasons, and they're also challenged for all sorts of reasons. And it's important as citizens of our democracy that students understand what's the difference between when a book's challenged and when it's actually, banned from a school. And so there's nonpartisan reasons for helping students understand this better. And then you should, of course, view your district policy if there are any policies about displays or exhibits, and just make sure that what you did does line up with those policies. Then taking that written rationale, you could have a meeting with the principal and the district librarian, explore the reasons behind the display, and offer an explanation, share more information about the history of banned books. And then, of course, if it's unresolved, just for your students' benefit, I think it is worth going to the next level with the district librarian's help and trying to see if the district curriculum office will support you in continuing to have the display.
So here's scenario two, and scenario two is around the controversy over a topic. And one of the things that we know that's happening right now is there's a lot of specific topics that are being targeted in legislation. And so for this one, we're talking about activism. Controversy over a topic, activism, has blown up on social media. A parent calls the librarian and asks for a list of any books on the topic of activism. How do you plan to address this? We're going to ask you to pause for just a minute to jot down some ideas, and then we'll go to the next slide to address it. So let's see what you wrote down. Here are the suggestions we have. First, we want to encourage anyone to thank the parent for reaching out, because we do like to partner with our parents. Explain that the request that they have is considered a public information request, also known as a PIR. You can offer the link to the library catalog if it's an open link, and also offer information on how to contact the public information request system or email in your district. We'd also encourage you to follow up with your library supervisor and your principal, so that they are aware about this parent reaching out, wanting to know this list of titles. And then also end by contacting the public information request office so that they are in the the loop regarding a potential inquiry, and they're prepared and ready to address it.
And if you're in a smaller district, you may not have a PR, a public information office, but your local attorney that the district contracts with or your curriculum team at the district office should know how to handle their.
It's also a good opportunity to maybe find out whether or not where those kind of requests are submitted. So if you don't know where that would go, it's certainly a good opportunity to find out. So again, a proactive way so that you know how to direct a request, because it's not practice for librarians to submit volumes of papers with lists of titles. It's just not practical. Plus, our focus is also instruction. So we do have lots of challenge resources that we want to offer that will be in the notes or shared at the end. And all of these are linked to examples. And so one of the things that we wanted to share was an example of preparing for a dialogue. You will see kind of like if somebody says this is what you would say next. So it's just kind of talking points, so to speak, about how to practice through that dialogue. And of course, again, this is one of those things that I always tell our librarians, we actually practice. We have cards that I make and different scenarios, and we practice what that interaction could be. So this could be of some help for you. We also wanted to share the ALA challenge support link. They are there to help anyone with a challenge. They want to record any challenges that are happening across the country because they do document this. But they also do provide support in the area of talking points. And so if you have specific reconsiderations submitted regarding, say, graphic novels, and you don't know what you can say or know how to support the keeping of it in your collection, they can give you the talking points to support for that or any other questions you have. And of course, you can always look at the Freedom website. We've also been using that FREADOM hashtag to connect others with one another so that you can get information. Other places and resources you can get for support include Every Library, the ACLU, which we know is has been keeping up to date on what's happening, has actually started, making some action steps and communicating with districts that are maybe not following their policy and that sort of thing. Also, the National Coalition Against Censorship, they've been sharing a lot of webinars lately. They recently had one about student activists. And so if you have students that inquire about what can I do, it's perfectly within your scope of sharing information to say, well, there's actually resources that you can go look up if you are interested in finding out more. PEN America is also very active in terms of supporting authors. They have been known to write letters to school districts when they know that there's certain books that are being removed and not having gone through the processes. So Carolyn, is there anything you want to add on this slide?
I did want to add that Every Library has been working with a researcher, Taslyn Magnuson, who has been tracking cases all over the country. And so you're trying to get an overview of a lot of the different cases that are happening. OIF does send out that weekly newsletter, but on every library site, there is a place where you can go to see those that have happened all throughout the year. And, some books have been challenged in the same book all over the country. Some places it's very local and regional. So that just gives you kind of an overview of what's going on.
So we also have some resources that we want to share. And so we've linked several of them here on a Wakelet. And so this Wakelet, again, will be available. You can scan the QR code, also and bookmark that and look through the different resources. Some of these are resources that we shared in the slide, like a lot of the OIF resources and that sort of thing. But we want to encourage you to look through to see if there's anything there that can be useful to you. And we want to close with this really great quote from author Jason Reynolds. As you know, he is the first National Ambassador for Young People's Literature to be asked to stay on for a second term. And he shared this really wonderful quote that I'm going to go ahead and read to you. Anytime we eliminate or wall off certain narratives, we are not getting the whole picture of the world we live in. You know, Jason's words get to the heart of what libraries are all about. And we hope that Carolyn and I, that the work that we shared with you, the information we shared with you today, helps to prepare you for whatever may come your way. And just remember too, that if you find yourself not having the answer, know that there are people ready to support you. Just reach out.
So, of course, feel free to reach out to us. I'm at Techno Library on Twitter, and my email is actually technolibrary@gmail.com. If you have questions or you're in a situation where you're concerned and you want some support, we can help connect you to the people that can support you. And we just want to thank you for being here today.
Yes, I want to thank you also. Again, you know, my contact information is here on Twitter. My Gmail is BeckyCalzada15@gmail.com. And so we are happy to answer your questions. And if we don't have the answers, happy to direct you to get those answers that you need.
Thank you so much, friends, for everything that you shared and just also how you really made us think. And I loved the practice because it's something that we're all going through. And I've had things pop up in the last month or so at our little school in Iowa. And it really makes you not only think about all of our kids and all of our families, but everything that we can do too, just to be proactive. And I think that the way our library community is throughout the country and throughout the world, we're just so lucky to have one another. And I'm really thankful for everything you shared, but also just supporting us in the new things that you're doing. So you guys are so amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to share just a few things before we wrap up, and always like to share all the great things that are going on with Future Ready Librarians. You can, of course, find what you need around Future Ready Librarians on our website. And there's a lot of things that are very helpful that are also located there, including the self-reflection. And if you need help having a conversation, which is a lot of what we talked about today, we also have our conversation starter that I find really helpful because it helps in building those collaborative relationships we have and just opening the door to more conversations. You will also find our podcast, and Becky and Caroline actually did a podcast with us for season 3. And you can find not only this season, we're now on season 4, but you can find all 4 of the seasons here and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And so I just have loved these conversations and go back to them as I walk and share them all the time. And so things that you might be focusing on within your own practice or even sharing with your teachers or administrators, these are very, very, very helpful. And so we have a lot of great ones coming up. Also, our past Future Ready Librarians are curated on our site, so you can locate those on there too. And just as we said in the beginning, like, become engaged and stay connected. I think that's one of the most important things about Future Ready Schools and Future Ready Librarians is that ongoing conversation and support that we have. One of the best places is on our Facebook group, and you can find the link in the slide, but also on the link at the bottom here. And if you're not a member, please join. We would love to have you be part of that group and also the conversation and sharing that happens. But also you can go to Instagram, you can go to Twitter, and find these things around Future Ready Librarians, but also Future Ready Schools is a great place to be as well. And so continue that conversation, and please continue to connect with us and reach out to our special guest today if you need help over the topics that they have shared. It's all just so important. And thank you so much for joining us again for another Future Ready Librarian webinar, and a big shout out to Follett, our sponsors. So thank you, everybody, and we will see you all soon.